The other day, Girish Karnad and I had to meet. The place chosen was my office in Worli. It was a Sunday morning. I was a little late. And when I reached, I found that a huge crowd had collected, and Girish Karnad had to be protected because he is now a star. Many of us know him as more than that. We know him as a playwright, as a film director, and an actor. I think perhaps in that order. Would you agree with that?
Indeed so. I consider myself primarily a playwright. And then in films, I hope a director first and then an actor. I mean, I'm an actor entirely by accident.
How did you begin? You began with writing plays or acting in amateur dramatics?
Oh no, my first passion, as I said, was playwriting, and even in terms of history, I think that would come first. You see, I grew up in a place called Sirsi, a small town on the Western Ghats.
Where is that?
That is in Karnataka, in the Karwar district. And this is a place which was then a place where there was a lot of Yakshagana performances. Once the monsoons were over and the harvests were over, you had this Yakshagana performances going for the rest of the year. And it was also a place where people were very fond of theatre, so you had a lot of visiting company nataks from North Karnataka, from other parts, which are really the derivative Parsi companies. We used to do a lot of mythological and historical plays. So right through my childhood in Sirsi, I used to see either Yakshagana or these company nataks. And used to love it, I mean, in one's childhood, more than the films that one used to see. It was the theatre that kept one fascinated. And I think my love for theatre really comes from that period.
You went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
What did you study in Oxford?
I did philosophy, politics and economics.
Someone said you also studied mathematics.
I did mathematics here actually. I was doing my MA with statistics. I had done my BA with mathematics and statistics, and I was doing my MA with statistics when I got the scholarship. So I'd done the statistics and went to Oxford to study PPE, as they call it.
Yeah. I asked that question because one sees a certain mathematical patterns in some of your plays.
I think mathematics is a terrific discipline, I mean, looking back, for a writer, because you train your mind to look at all the details and these conditions remaining so, now this function changing in this fashion, what would happen? So all through you are trained to look at certain units as unchanging, certain units as changing and changing in particular direction, the limits and so on, so on. And then what would happen as a result of these changes. This I found was an extraordinary training, mental discipline for a playwright, because if you're a playwright, you're interested in all your characters. You have to be interested in all your characters, whether major or minor. And all the time you're saying now, how would this character respond to this situation, mentally, physically, in terms of action, in terms of his attitudes? What would that character do? How would that relate to whatever one has said in the other part of the play? So the whole thing is like a mathematical theorem, really. And this is how I've seen it, and this is how I work at it. This is why I find it very difficult to work at a play. It takes me a very long time, but I think it's worthwhile.
Yes. Did you start writing before going to Oxford or afterwards?
No, my trip to England was useful in another way. I think although I was writing here, I think I was writing in Canada. When I left for England, I had decided never to come back. I had decided that India was full of Philistines, and the country which understood genius or culture or intelligence or whatever you have, when one is 21, one's full of that, would be England, the country of Auden and Eliot and and so on. But once one stayed in that country, one stayed there long enough, one realized that there was nothing there that could really relate to one's basic preoccupations. I mean, I wrote Yayati, and of course I had written Yayati by the time I reached there, and I could see that Yayati would be relevant to England, not only because it was an Indian myth, but my preoccupations were different. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized that I had to get back to my country, come back to India. And this is where what I had to do would matter ultimately.
But you didn't find your preoccupations changing while you were there? They're bound to have.
They changed. I mean, they got wider. I got a better perspective on India, on my own background, on my own preoccupations. But it intensified my desire to come back, actually.
Why this preoccupation with Indian history and mythology?
It may be, as I said, my upbringing in Sirsi, where one was very close to the folk tales and mythology. In the class, talking to students. I mean, Rama and Krishna might be just out there in the streets, and they were not mythological figures which were distant. But in the small town living, in the small town experience, these mythological figures and local folk heroes were almost a part of, as would be the characters one reads about in newspapers today, and not very remote and very real. And therefore, I think I built up a very real relationship, as did most of my contemporaries from that background, with these characters. Secondly, I have always found that immediate experience, I find it very hard to put it in a play. I need to distance it, I need to give it a form. And I think this is where my mathematical training was such a great help. It helps you to sort of put it in a shape and a form and distance it, gives it a formal look. And there, myths or folk tales are easier to handle than raw, immediate experience for me. And thirdly, I find that with use of myths and folk tales and so on, you are able to tap, because people already know these tales. They already, you share these. There is a community feeling in India, a community which shares these folk tales and myths and so on. So you can just pick out on what you like, take a lot for granted, and develop or go into greater depth. Unlike a novel, as you know, a play has to be over if it's staged in 2 to 2.5 hours.
Yes.
And unless you take this common assumptions in the audience for granted and then build on them, you would just be writing, you would only be sort of tapping the surface. I mean, this is my theory.
The stories which you tackle are rather attractive.
But I always tackle subjects which excite me first. And then the process of writing is an attempt to share this excitement. What is it that excited me about a particular tale? For instance, Bali took me 15 years to write, 15 years literally, during the course of which I did about 13, 14 different versions. Because I couldn't for the life of me understand why the play wasn't working out. I mean, I knew the story excited me. Something about the excitement I wasn't able to catch. Until somewhere I knew what it was, and then I got it.
Can we just recap the story very briefly?
Well, Bali, what's called Bali in Hindi by Satyadev Dubey's translation, but in Kannada is called Hittinunja, is based on a Jain myth. And quite, in a total summarized form, it is that the king has to give a sacrifice of 100 sheep to the gods. Now, he is a Jain king. He can't do it. His mother is recommending it, and the mother says, if you don't sacrifice this 100 sheep, I'm going to commit suicide. So this king is caught between two kinds of violence. Either he's responsible for the death of the sheep or responsible for the death of the mother. So a compromise is reached, and he agrees to sacrifice a cock made of dough, atta, because it's inanimate, to the gods. He takes the cock, it puts it in front of the god, and just when he's about to slaughter the cock, this cock of dough begins to crow. It comes alive. So the Jains were very clearly saying that there's no difference between intended violence and actual violence. Right. To intend violence is as good as actual. Right. But the myth is so rich, that this equation between intention and action had to be worked out in careful detail. It in fact is the most, in terms of action, the play with the least action, but in terms of, I think, working out of ideas, in terms of an intellectual, dealing with the philosophical ideas, my most complex play.
You're saying it gave you a lot of problems.
It gave me a lot of problems because of that, because you have to manage a kind of theatrical tension while dealing with ideas. And when you do that, you realize why people like Shaw or Pirandello are so marvelous. I mean, they can deal with ideas and still make it exciting theatre. It's not at all easy. And writing this play, I think I learned more about playwriting with this one play than I did with the others, which came much more easily.
Haywadan may have come more easily because the story...
Haywadan was the easiest, because the storyline is simple. And basically, I think also because although the original tale comes from Vetal Pachisi, which is an Indian tale, Thomas Mann had already dealt with it, in his short story in a long short story called The Transposed Heads. So he had broken the back of the plotting. So all I had to do was to take that story and then see what I can do further with it in terms of the story of the horse-headed man and so on. But the basic problem as to how do you build a plot which is not just action oriented, but which also gives scope for thought, for emotion, to explore the whole situation, not merely in terms of character and emotion, but also in terms of a philosophical analysis. That problem had been broken for me with that story by Thomas Mann already. So it was a much easier play to write. Also the form was simpler.
It comes through very vividly in the play. This, which is the man, the one with the body or the mind? Yeah. That dilemma comes through very beautifully and very easily to the audience. In Yayati, you took another moral dilemma. Now, did you find that worked itself the way you wanted it to?
When I wrote Yayati, one was, in those days, one was tremendously influenced by existentialism. Sartre and Camus and all the other writers, and one read them endlessly. And one was very impressed by the basic problem that faced, which was that ultimately a man creates his own morality, even if there is no God. And therefore a man is responsible for his own actions. It's this whole concept of responsibility at the core of existential thought. Like in Anouilh's Antigone, the whole question of her saying, okay, I accept the responsibility for what I'm doing. Or in Sartre's Flies, where ultimately Orestes says, I take these flies on my shoulders, I take them as a proper punishment for whatever I've done, but I do the action willingly. This whole question of responsibility was there, and when I was reading the story of Yayati in Mahabharata, it suddenly hit me that here was a man who had been cursed to old age in the prime of his youth, and what was he doing? He's going around begging people to take his youth. And his son accepts the youth. And the king, who was cursed to old age in the prime of his life, becomes young, and the son becomes old. So you see, here the total natural order is changed. The father is young, the son is old. And I said, what consequences would ensue from this act of irresponsibility from the father? Because he had been cursed for what he had done. And that curse is now taken by a young man who had nothing to do with his father's doings. Now I feel that this could not be without its tragic consequences. And that's how the play emerged. But at the back of it, even in the play itself, in what the chorus says, you can see a lot of digested or undigested existentialism, because I was young and wanted to show that I liked existentialism.
Girish, there is a fifth play which you've written, which, as far as I know, has not been translated into any language.
Well, it has not been translated into any language except, outside Kannada, because I didn't permit it. After the play was published, I felt it was still raw. I had not worked on it enough. So now I have rewritten it after 6-7 years. It needed a lot of polishing, which I had not done. It was a mistake to have allowed it to be published in that form, I think.
This takes place in England, and it's about an Indian brother and sister who live there.
Yes, it's about a incestuous passion that a sister has for brother, and I placed it in England because I felt many of these suppressed passions really come out when people go abroad. At home, your family, your social background helps you to control them, but when you're out on your own, it suddenly bursts up. That's why I kept it. But the amusing part of it was that when I was looking for a title for the play, and I was looking up the Rigveda, there is a dialogue there between Yama and Yami, the brother and sister, where the sister asks the brother and makes an incestuous proposal to the brother. I found that the first stanza said, the sister says, I have crossed the 7 seas and come to this vast and deserted island to face my brother with my love for him. So, this is where I think some of the archetypes keep working. I hadn't remembered, I'd read this dialogue, that she should also cross the 7 seas, come to an island. Somehow it gave an appropriateness or authority to placing the play in England.
Yes.
Although I hadn't thought of this when writing the play.
There is a peculiar dichotomy in your personality. Your creative personality, in the sense that your plays are distant, they deal with history and mythology, whereas your films are of today, most of them anyway. Now why is that?
I think this is probably why, as I said earlier, I find the immediate experience surrounding me too difficult to control. It's too raw for me to control. And most of my plays have been based on novels written by other people. Anantmurthy or Alan
Most of your films?
Most of my films are based on novels, where the experience seemed to me already given some kind of a shape, although I may reshape it in my films. Interestingly, in terms of this, the one script I wrote for myself, which was Vandananda Kaladale, Once Upon a Time, was placed in the 13th century. This may be a certain inability inside me. I don't know.
Or is it that you are very aware of the audience, that you feel that the theatre audience would be able to deal with intellectual concepts in a far easier way than a film audience would? And for a film audience, you have to relate something to the present day.
Well, I don't know, both Kadu and Samskara, which were Samskara was the first film I was involved in, for which I wrote the script, and Kadu, which I directed and wrote. The material was extraordinarily good. I mean, it was intellectually very stimulating, sociologically very relevant as well. Also, it raised very important philosophical problems. It just happened that there was a richness of experience, of contemporary experience there, which I probably have not been able to get out of my own background until now. It may happen. As I said, Anjuman Liga was the only play which related to my experience. No, I couldn't really say why it happens, but it happens.
When you say that play related to experience, what do you mean?
I mean, the details in it, the background, it's placed in a university town, obviously Oxford to anyone, or Cambridge to anyone who's known it. Yes. The characters, what they speak.
No, I clarified because the only reference you made so far was to an incestuous relationship.
Yes, I mean, that part of it was... even the incestuous relationship I took up only because it seemed to me the one passion which is condemned to be unfulfilled. Therefore, passion pure and simple. I mean, if you write a play about a brother and sister who can live together, then there is no passion in it, and it's like any other thing. So that seemed to me an excellent example of passion, which can be both creative and destructive, and that's why I took it in that play.
Coming back to your films, Samskara caused quite a controversy, didn't it?
Oh yes, it was banned, and then we went up to the ministry, and then it was banned by the censors, and then the same year it was also given the President's Gold Medal for being the best film of the year. So we had it both ways.
No, but apart from official action, it also created a furor among the audience.
Well, I think because it was wrongly understood, the book as well as the film was wrongly understood as an attack on the Brahmins, on Brahmin orthodoxy. Of course it attacks orthodoxy, and it sees orthodoxy as a kind of dead wood, which kills any kind of creative thinking. But it was not necessarily Brahmins, it could have been any other caste. It just happened that the writer was a Brahmin, and those of us who were involved in the film, like me, knew this Brahmin background very well. It could have been any other caste. Certainly it could be seen as an attack on the caste system. But it has a very metaphysical basis. Basically it asks the question, what right does one man have to judge another man? Particularly if that man happens to be dead. Which seemed to me a marvelous human metaphysical position from which to take up.
Now, most of these films we've been talking about, most of your films have dealt with small towns, villages, whereas one regards Girish Karnad as a man of the city, the big city, the Oxford, Bombay.
Well, the reason I think is what amazed me, particularly I came back from England, that ultimately, even in cities, even in a place like Bangalore, I couldn't speak for a city like Bombay because I've come recently to it, but even in a place like Bangalore, a man may be an urban creature when he's out in the streets or in the office, but the moment he enters his home, he behaves exactly as though he were in a small town. All the caste patterns, the family patterns, the clan patterns all emerge, and this is what Sudhir Kakkar has written so eloquently, that ultimately all Indians behave exactly as though they belong to a traditional matrix, even in a city existence. And I found that while one could treat the city life ironically by pointing this out, really if you wanted to know what an Indian was, how an Indian reacts, what is it to be an Indian, then it was much better to go at the roots, take these traditional, this traditional matrix and examine it at the source, and you get much more, without wasting time, much more to the roots of the problem.
In Utsav you have made a departure, totally.
Yes.
Have you not?
I hope so.
Yes. You've gone into something which perhaps is considered heresy in New Indian cinema, which is to make a comedy.
Yes.
Was that a conscious decision, or did it just happen?
And a comedy based on a classic, my God, I mean, everyone's, I've been jumping down and saying, how can you treat a classic like that, as though a classic was something intended to be something unrelated and, but Mrichakatikam, the original, is so alive, I love that play. And secondly, there is this whole tradition of humor, of picaresque humor in Sanskrit. It's not only there in Mrichakatikam, it's there in Danden's Dashakumar Charit, the story of 10 princes, right down till about the 11th century. Then, presumably, Indian Puritanism kills that tradition, because then that humor disappears suddenly. And then we find it traveling to Arabia, reappearing in the Panchatantra and the other tales, also in Arabian Nights, and then through Italy into European context. In that sense, if you really look at the history of picaresque literature, even in Europe, you will find that historically it's related to the picaresque tradition even in India. And I wanted to bring it back again. I mean, one had responded to Boccaccio, one had responded to Canterbury Tales, to Arabian Nights, and to Danden and Shudraka, who wrote Mrichakatikam. And really, Utsav is an attempt to sort of summarize that whole tradition within me. And also to link it with another tradition, which is that if you see at a commercial Hindi film today, almost every trick in it you find in Mrichakatikam.
Right.
Like the hero being led to his execution, he is being framed by the villain, and tension here, parallel cutting, the tension here, will the hero be saved in time or won't he be saved in time? Will then the heroine going through the rain to meet her lover. Just mention it, every trick of the trade, the wrong person being accused, everything is there in there. So I also wanted to link it up with the modern commercial film tradition. So the film is almost shot like a 20th century commercial film, and deliberately. This, of course, scandalized the orthodox critics. They thought I hadn't found the form for the original Sanskrit play. But it was intentional. And there are these two traditions. One, the tradition that has disappeared, the tradition of the picaresque humor. The other tradition was what has come through the company nataks and then has become the modern Hindi, well, not Hindi, Indian commercial cinema. Both of which I wanted to capture while doing a film on Mrichakatikam.
Now coming to your third career, you as an actor, are you objective about yourself? Do you see yourself as a good actor?
I see myself as someone improving as an actor. The more I continue to be an actor, I think I'm getting to be a better actor. But I didn't become an actor by choice. It was almost, by accident that I got into it. When we did Samskara, the first film, we didn't have money to hire professional actors. So just the group of Madras players, there was a group of people, amateurs who used to do plays. We all did the film, and that's how I got into films. And then I was asked by Shyam, and then I was asked by Basu Chatterjee, and so on and so on. And then I became an actor. I've become now, acting is my main profession. I think I'm a better actor now than I used to be 5 years ago. I've learnt in the process. But had I wanted to be an actor, I think I would have learnt earlier, if you see what I mean. Everything needs a training. And you can see an untrained actor from a trained actor. And I was really raw when I came into acting.
You don't find this distracting that, you're an actor, film director, playwright. How do you, settle between one and the other?
It certainly eats into one's time. I wish I had more time to write, or more time to plan directing a film. But I'm afraid one's living depends on acting, because that's where the money is. You can't make money by writing or directing films.
Khandan has given you immense popularity. Why did you act in it? How did it come about?
Well, Sridhar Kshirsagar asked me if I would act in this series, and I immediately said yes, because ultimately television is the medium of the future. It is the medium that's going to reach almost every person in India who can be near a television set and reach many more people than will ever see a film. And I'd always felt that one should do something in the medium. I didn't know what, and this seemed an ideal opportunity to be associated with it. The excitement is to be where things are happening, and I'm glad that I'm there doing it.
What are you working on now? Is it something for TV or theatre or what?
At the moment I'm writing a play, again a historical play, I'm afraid. You'll have to forgive me.
Even though you're not on a journey anywhere?
No, I'm not. It's an incident which happened in the 11th century in Karnataka and concerns the not the founder, but the prophet of Veerashaiva religion, Basavanna.
Well, we are hoping to see it very soon. Then.
Thank you very much.
That's something to look forward to.
Well, I hope it works out as well as I hope it will.
It's been very nice talking to you, Girish. Thank you so much.
Thank you.